Good morning. This general election is about, in the end, just one word: security. Our economic security, our nation's security. Come the 8th of May, in just 4 weeks' time, it will be either David Cameron or Ed Miliband who crosses the threshold of number 10 and takes responsibility for our nation's future. Every day it becomes clearer that Ed Miliband will do anything to get into Downing Street. Day after day, he refuses to rule out categorically doing any deal with the Scottish National Party. That silence speaks volumes about the man, his weakness, and his refusal to be straight with the British public. Above all, his willingness to play fast and loose with one of the most precious things that any Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is entrusted to protect: the security of our country. Today I want to talk about the long-term threat to Britain's security that would be posed by a Labour government propped up by the SNP. Defence of the realm is the first duty of government. In 28 days' time, people will cast their votes at a time when we're seeing multiple and concurrent challenges to the international order to an extent that many believe is unprecedented. Voters will be choosing a Prime Minister who has to deal with the threats from ISIL, spreading a new form of fascism and bringing its terror to the shores of the Mediterranean. In Eastern Europe, Russia is subverting democracy, seeking to change international borders by force. And in Africa, Boko Haram is causing chaos in northern Nigeria and along its border. As Defence Secretary, I work closely with David Cameron and our armed forces as we review intelligence and make decisions every day to help keep Britain safe. In the face of multiple threats to Britain and British interests, David Cameron has shown strong leadership and always puts defence first. And that matters because one of the biggest questions at this election and for the new Parliament is whether we should renew our nuclear deterrent. No issue is more important for a government: the security of our nation, our freedom, and our way of life. For 45 years now, Britain has kept a ballistic missile submarine at sea, providing the ultimate guarantee of security against nuclear attack or nuclear blackmail 24/7, 365 days a year. Our nuclear submarines protect all of the United Kingdom, including Scotland. Last year I saw for myself that deterrent in Fallon, where the crews of Vanguard, Vengeance, Victorious and Vigilant are based. Not only is Fallon the biggest employer in Scotland, Fallon is Britain's peace camp. And today, in a world where there are approximately 17,000 nuclear weapons, we cannot gamble with the security that Fallon and our deterrent provide. We know that there are substantial nuclear arsenals and the number of nuclear states has increased. Russia is modernising its nuclear forces and actively commissioning a new class of 8 ballistic missile submarines. North Korea has conducted 3 nuclear tests and other ballistic missile tests in defiance of the international community. Other, often very unstable states want nuclear weapons and seek the technology to develop them. After 35 years of continuous patrolling, our current 4 Vanguard-class ballistic missile submarines will come out of service in the next decade. In an increasingly dangerous world in which we cannot know now what nuclear threats may emerge in the 2030s, the 2040s and the 2050s, the only responsible choice is to recommit to our continuous at-sea deterrent now, so that we can cope with any direct nuclear threat to the United Kingdom or to our NATO allies. For those who argue that no threats will emerge, I ask, how can you be certain when the cancer of Islamic extremism, the Arab Spring, and aggressive Russia, these things were not foreseen just a few years ago? No one can predict accurately what unconventional threats the next 45 years may bring. So the question is, do we renew our nuclear submarines, or do we accept the loss of our ultimate insurance policy? That is a question the next Prime Minister must answer. And that Prime Minister will be one of two people, David Cameron or Ed Miliband. Imagine Ed Miliband limping into office, aided by the crutch of the SNP. On Tuesday night, Nicola Sturgeon was explicit in a statement that was as arrogant as it was terrifying. She said she was, and I quote, offering to make Ed Miliband Prime Minister. And she has made crystal clear the price she would demand: more spending, more debt, unlimited welfare, and scrapping our nuclear deterrent. Last night she said, and I quote, "You'd better believe Trident is a red line," unquote. So if Miliband wants the keys to number 10, he must abandon any plans to renew our Vanguard ballistic missile submarines. This naive worldview of the SNP would sacrifice the long-term security of the United Kingdom and play into the hands of our enemies. That policy is a threat to us all, the people of England, of Wales, of Northern Ireland, and of Scotland. When Britain could face nuclear blackmail by rogue states, this self-indulgent approach is more suited to the politics of student protest than to a party of government. It is a sign of Ed Miliband's weakness that he has failed to explicitly rule out any deal. I wrote to him in March, challenging him to give an assurance that he would not risk Britain's nuclear deterrent. No answer. In the absence of that assurance, voters can only conclude that he would be prepared to barter the future of Britain's national security for power. That would shatter the 60-year consensus that has existed amongst governments of all colours in favour of an operationally independent nuclear deterrent. Britain doesn't pay ransoms, and a Conservative government would never bow to demands from Scottish separatists. More than that, we have long believed that our deterrent underpins the peace on which our economic prosperity depends. That is why I today announce that the Conservative manifesto will guarantee that we will build a new fleet of 4 successor ballistic missile submarines, replacing the 4 Vanguard boats. We will retain the Trident continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent to provide the ultimate guarantee of our safety. This is the only sensible policy to pursue. There is simply no alternative to continuous patrols that provides the same level of protection and deterrence. We know that because successive governments have looked at the options. 2 years ago, the official government review concluded that there is no alternative as capable or as cost-effective as a submarine-based deterrent. While some parties have proposed 3, or even absurdly, in the case of the Liberal Democrats, 2 boats, all these studies have shown that 4 submarines are required to maintain this continuous posture. We agree, and we are committed to a deterrent operating around the clock, not one that takes the weekend off. Given the £38 billion black hole in the defence budget that we inherited from Labour, we have scrutinised the successor procurement programme to ensure value for money. We have identified savings in the assessment phase that is now underway, and that rigour on costs will continue. But we're talking about maintaining a capability in service until 2060. As we said in the 2011 parliamentary report, the cost of the successor submarines is estimated at £25 billion over 25 years. If the costs were spread evenly, they would represent an annual insurance premium of 0.13% of all government spending. To put that £25 billion in context, Crossrail will cost £14.8 billion. Replacing those submarines is £25 billion. Crossrail 2 would cost £27 billion. Yet the Scottish National Party would sacrifice the security of the United Kingdom on its hostility to all things nuclear and on the basis of cost savings that will be negligible compared to the impact on our national security. It is because we have balanced the defence budget that we are able to invest in replacing all 4 existing submarines. So to those who question whether we can afford to renew Trident, I say we cannot afford not to do so. So in conclusion, in 4 weeks' time, when you go into the polling booth, think carefully. Remember, it will be either David Cameron or Ed Miliband who will be the next Prime Minister. Can you really trust Ed Miliband with the nation's security? Whatever he says between now and polling day, can you really trust him not to put the nuclear deterrent on the bargaining table, a chip to be tossed away in some shabby backroom deal with the SNP? So my message today could not be clearer. We live in an uncertain world, facing threats on multiple fronts. The next government must plan ahead, must renew that deterrent so that we can always keep one of our boats continuously at sea. Today, the Conservatives make that pledge. And only with a Conservative government can you be sure and certain that our deterrent will be maintained. Thank you. Now, very happy to take some questions. Who wants to kick off? Yeah. Yes, sorry, the lady in the front. Yes.
Kate Devlin from the Herald. Can I just check then, in terms of coalition deals, are you suggesting it be a red line and you won't do any deal with the Liberal Democrats unless they sign up to 4 votes?
Absolutely, and we've already faced that challenge. David Cameron faced that challenge back in 2010, and he saw it off. The Liberal Democrats, as you know, were opposed to Trident, and we made it absolutely clear that they could not get their way on that. And we have proceeded, as you know, to spend money on the assessment phase of Trident and to proceed up to the main gate decision that is due next year. And they were told that that was the position, and they've had to accept that. So we've already faced that challenge. There will be no deal between a Conservative government and any other party so far as a 4-boat continuous at sea nuclear deterrent is concerned. Yeah.
Thank you. Chris Shipp from ITV News. We've just had a coalition government in which one party supported Trident and the other party didn't. You should know, you've been the Defence Secretary in that government. Why on earth then couldn't Labour and the SNP, who were planning a looser arrangement, why on earth couldn't they come to a similar decision that you came to in 2010?
The difference is the SNP are not planning a looser arrangement. Nicola Sturgeon for the SNP made it very clear last night that Trident was an absolute red line, not a loose arrangement. She said, you had better believe it, that it's a red line. She is absolutely clear there are no circumstances in which the SNP would support the renewal of a nuclear deterrent. So you have uncertainty as to what a Labour government might do, what deal they might strike. It is only with the Conservatives that you can be absolutely clear that you will have a 4-boat, continuous at sea deterrent replaced in the next Parliament.
You're not addressing the point that the Lib Dems have ruled out this morning. They said they don't want a continuous at sea deterrent. So therefore, are you ruling out a coalition with the Lib Dems?
We are ruling...
That's the conclusion of your argument.
No, we're aiming, as you know, for a majority Conservative government. We've already seen off any Liberal Democrat threat to the nuclear deterrent in the coalition that we formed in 2020 and which is coming to an end. We saw them off. The question Ed Miliband has to answer is why can't he be explicit now that he too would see off a similar deal? There's ambiguity there which needs to be resolved before the people of this country vote in 4 weeks' time. Now,
Rob Hutton from Bloomberg. I mean, this is nonsense, isn't it? There are Tory votes for Trident and there are Labour votes for Trident. So a Labour government, Labour minority government, could get Trident through in the next election, in the next Parliament. Isn't the biggest threat to Trident, in fact, an independent Scotland taking away the place where we have the missiles? And that's more likely to be provoked by, say, a vote to leave the European Union.
well, we're not faced with an independent Scotland. The referendum went the other way last year. What we're faced with in 4 weeks' time is a decision as to who you want to be Prime Minister and who is explicitly ruling out any kind of shabby deal with the SNP. We are ruling that out, and we are committing to to replacing the 4 continuous at-sea submarines. So we're ruling it out.
But you'd vote with Labour to renew it, so they'd have the votes.
Well, when you say we have voted, we haven't voted.
Well, no, but so let's, in this hypothetical situation where we have a minority Labour government supported by the SNP that you want us to think about, they say they want to renew Trident, and the SNP say, well, you don't have our votes, but presumably they could turn to the Conservative Party, who might have more than 50 seats.
But you couldn't be sure exactly how an SNP, Labour government would work. You couldn't be sure what the conditions are. All we've got is what the SNP have said, that it is an absolute red line for them. The only way to be absolutely sure to continue the 4-vote deterrent is to vote Conservative. Isabel.
How can you describe David Cameron as a Prime Minister who always puts defence first? How can you describe David Cameron as a Prime Minister who always puts defence first when the Conservatives are protecting other spending areas but not promising to maintain defence spending at 2% of GDP?
Well, first of all, David Cameron has always put defence first. That's why we have restored the defence budget, dealt with a black hole, why we have now balanced the budget, why we are investing in aircraft carriers, in hunter-killer submarines, in armoured vehicles, why we're buying joint strike fighters. That is been an absolute priority for this government, to sort out the defence budget and to start investing again in the equipment that our armed forces need. So far as commitments for the future are concerned, this is one this morning. This is a commitment to continue the at-sea deterrent for the next 35 years, which goes way beyond the period of any spending review. Michael.
Michael Crick, Channel 4 News. You've given us a not very revealing glimpse of your manifesto. Will your manifesto, when it's published, presumably next week, commit to spending 2% of GDP? Can you promise us that now? No buts?
Well, you'll have the manifesto next week, and I shall be speaking at greater length on the rest of defence policy, in fact, tomorrow morning. But what I have given you today is a further specific commitment, irrespective of the 2%, a specific commitment as to what we will spend money on. Not simply conventional forces, but renewing the nuclear deterrent that has served us well. And that is a commitment that will not simply go through when we renew the deterrent in 2016, will not simply go through the next Parliament, but will serve us right up until 2060. So you couldn't have a stronger and more long-term commitment than that.
So
for the rest of the manifesto, you will have to wait till next week. Yes, Ben.
Thanks. Ms Fallon, the language you used to attack Ed Miliband was very striking, saying if he could stab his brother in the back, he'll stab the UK in the back. Is that rather desperate, hysterical stuff? Do you regret it? And I'm not quite sure, are you attacking him for being too tough, in other words, able to stab his brother in the back, or weak? I'm not sure.
Well, first of all, this is an issue of leadership. He himself said last week in the television debate that leadership is an issue in this election. So we are right to contrast Ed Miliband's position against David Cameron. With David Cameron, you have clarity and certainty and competence, and you know exactly where you're going to be with a nuclear deterrent. We are still not sure whether there mightn't be some deal between Labour and the SNP that might in the end rest on not renewing the deterrent. That is the red line that the SNP have drawn up. Now clearly Ed Miliband wants power. He's already shown what he's prepared to do to get power. The danger for our country is that he could be weak in the way weak in what he achieves, weak on welfare, weak on deficit reduction, and now, most critically of all, weak on our nuclear defence. Chris
Hope, Telegraph. On that point from Ben, do you think that Ed Miliband lacks the moral fibre to be Prime Minister, to take the tough choices that you take in your office every day, and he somehow lacks that?
Yeah, this is an issue of leadership and judgment, and it is right for people to ask before they vote in 4 weeks' time which leader is most likely to take the big decisions to keep this country safe. David Cameron has already demonstrated that in restoring the defence budget, investing again in the equipment our armed forces need, and making this commitment today crystal clear that we will commit to replacing the nuclear deterrent with all 4 new submarines. There's a lady right at the back.
Tessa Chapman, 5 News. Your warning against Labour doing a grubby, shabby deal with the SNP isn't a personal attack on Ed Miliband just the kind of grubby politics that voters just don't like?
No, this is an issue of leadership and of judgment. And the British people are entitled to know what sort of man might be the next Prime Minister and what he is prepared to do to get into Downing Street. We're faced now with a situation where a Labour government could be propped up by the SNP absolutely demanding the scrapping of Trident. That is a very serious issue, and it is up now to Ed Miliband to answer it. Yeah.
Mr. Fallon, you've said that this is a red line issue on Trident, but of course you've drawn a red line on an in-out referendum of the EU, and you could find yourself seeking a coalition with the Lib Dems. Which one would be the absolute red line if they said they wanted one or the other, but you couldn't have both? And secondly, is Ed Miliband a bumbling fool, as he's been portrayed by the Tories before, or is he ruthless? I'm not quite sure what the line of attack is on that.
Well, first of all, we're not seeking a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. We've done that. We're not doing that again. We're seeking a majority Conservative government, as you know. And renewing the nuclear deterrent is a big part of that, but also offering the British people the first proper choice on Europe they'd have had since 1975 is also part of it. The issue, so far as Ed Miliband is concerned, is he or is he not prepared to barter away our nuclear deterrent in some kind of deal with the Scottish National Party? It's they who have said it's an absolute red line for them. They've said, you'd better believe it. We need to know now from Ed Miliband, is he putting our nuclear deterrent onto the bargaining table? Yeah, somebody patient at the back.
Hi, William James, Reuters. You mentioned Russia modernising its nuclear capabilities. I'm interested in whether this could be perceived as the start of some kind of arms race. How do you assess the threat that Russia poses at the moment and the threat in the future with this modernised nuclear system?
Well, we've seen dramatically in the last year Russia's conventional threat, something we never thought would happen. Its attempt to alter international borders of sovereign states by force. We've seen aggression that nobody forecast a few years ago, which is an example of how we need to plan ahead to keep this country safe. So far as its nuclear capability is concerned, yes, we already know that Russia is modernising its nuclear fleet and its capability, which is why it would be folly to not do the same here. So.
Kieran Stacey from the Financial Times. You're asking Labour to rule out doing a coalition, or in fact any deal, with the SNP because of their commitment to, or their commitment not to have 4 boats. So will you do the same with the Lib Dems, who also have a commitment not to have 4 boats?
I think I've almost answered this. We had the same pressure from the Liberal Democrats in 2010, and David Cameron absolutely ruled it out. He made it very clear that our coalition government would proceed towards the final decision on replacing Trident by committing money. We've spent something like £1 billion already on the preparatory design work and so on, brushing aside any Liberal Democrat objection. So we're not prepared to do a deal with the Liberal Democrats or any other party. And the question now for Ed Miliband is he going to show the same judgment and character that David Cameron did? So, can we get a microphone up front here? And everybody else can hear the question.
Thank you. Emmanuel Obase from Africa House, London. Trade collaboration between UK and Sub-Saharan Africa. Regarding UK businesses trading in Africa, their confidence, obviously, at the moment is very poor due to the insecurity within the region. Now, the Nigerian government have got a new elected democratic elect president now. Would UK sell arms now to Nigeria in order to fight the insurgents?
Well, first of all, we have welcomed the election of the new government in Nigeria, and particular in the so far peaceful transfer of power that's taken place. The new government, I know, hasn't quite taken office yet, but we have welcomed it. It was a clear-cut result, and I think that bodes very well for the security of Nigeria. Nigeria, though, does face this huge insurgency of Boko Haram on its northeast border, and we will certainly be doing what we can to help. We've already had a military mission out in Abuja at the request of the former president, seeing specifically what more we can do in terms of training and support to help the Nigerian army, and our commitment will be there. We accept that. Chap at the back.
Tim Bouverie, ITN. Defence Secretary, Ed Miliband has just said that you're a decent man. Do you think he's a decent man?
I think in politics it's important to respect one's opponents, but to challenge in an election period their views. And he still has to answer this question. Is he prepared to get into Downing Street on the back of some deal with the SNP that would, in the end, increase our taxes everywhere across the United Kingdom, would put up the cost of welfare, and might weaken our defences? He has that question to answer.
So you don't think he's a decent man?
No, that's not what I said. That really is not what I said. I think it's important we should all respect each other, but in an election period we should be challenging his views. He is the only alternative Prime Minister of this country, and he needs to clarify urgently whether or not he would do a deal with the SNP and on what terms. All right? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.